so it's spring and I'm really excited to get my garden started. I am ready to create some sub-irrigation planters out of my pre-existing planters, and I can't tell you how happy I am that I finally decided to do this. Hopefully now, over vacation, I can go on vacation without coming back to a dead garden. So, plus it'll help my garden thrive. So, let's get started. I'll show you how I create my sub-irrigation planters. Okay, so our first step is to create our water holding containers. And what we want to do, well, first you want to make sure, see how many you're going to fit in here in your container that you're using. Whether you want to put two side by side or whether you just want one. It depends on how much water you want to hold, how deep the roots of the particular kind of plant you're going to plant might go, things like that. But I've decided to use one large one and one small one and put them side by side. Now the large one is going to act as the main container that's the fill container. And the small one is going to go right next to it and kind of make a reserve container. Water from this is going to flow out into this. How is that going to work? Well, first we're going to have to punch some holes in our containers. So using our X-Acto knife, you can take the cover and put that on. And because this portion here is going to be the bottom, whichever side you decide to make your bottom is fine. It's a good idea to put one facing up and one facing down, just so that they fit better into the container. So go ahead and determine which side is the bottom, and you're going to cut long strips into that. And when you cut your strips, because this is a thicker plastic, it's a good idea to kind of open the strips up just a little bit, so that they are actually, so there's actually enough space for the water to really do its work and seep in. So I'm going to just use my scissors. It just makes it a little easier to cut my strips a little bit wider. Now with the rest of the container, I'm going to create small holes in it so that the water can seep out. Now you can use your X-Acto knife utility knife and carve small holes in it. Or if you prefer, and that's why I have my drill, you can just save a little bit of time and drill holes all around it. I would say drill about 6 holes in the perimeter of this and maybe 2 or 3 holes in the top. So it helps to stagger your holes a little bit. So I have one up here, one down here, one here, and so on and so forth around this. And now we're going to go ahead and set that aside and do our second container. So now we have our second container completed, and we're going to revisit our first container, which is going to be our fill container. We want to make sure that we can insert this PVC pipe into our fill container. Now, I went ahead and cut this PVC pipe from a 5-foot long piece of PVC, and they're really inexpensive. It was less than $2 for the piece. And you know, I just measured it based on the height of my plastic container, my pot, and then cut it accordingly. Now, the top can be flush and flat, but try to get a little bit of a 45-degree angle. Well, I didn't quite succeed in this, but it's a little bit of an angle, and that just helps to make sure that if it gets pushed down into the bottom of the container, it doesn't cut off the water flow. The water can still seep out. So now that we've done that, my container has a little hole already in the base. Well, not a hole, but kind of this indentation. And I'm going to go ahead and use that as a template for me to cut that out so that I have a space to push this down inside. Okay, so I've completed that, cutting that piece. It fits perfectly. Excellent. I want it to fit a little bit snugly. I don't want it to have too many big, huge gaps in it. I don't want dirt to come pouring in. So if necessary, don't worry about it. You can always put a little bit of duct tape or something around the edge there, just to make sure, in case the area breaks that you're working on. So now we have our PVC pipe inserted with our angle there at the bottom. This is our fill container. And this is our overflow container, or not really overflow, more of a reserve container. So now what we're going to do is create our drainage system. We're going to start by putting a little bit of topsoil in the base of our container. This is just to make sure that the holes in the base cannot be plugged off. So here's some of my topsoil. Then I'm going to take my bucket. Now this is another old bucket I had lying around, didn't know what to do with, and I thought this would fit perfectly. The only thing is that I don't want to start draining quite that high. Really, I'm looking at about, let's see, halfway of my potted container. So maybe about here. Just gonna mark it with that hole. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this container so that it's a smaller size and it'll fit inside a little bit better and drain before it's completely full. Alright, so I've cut my container. It's not too pretty. It's kind of jagged around the edges, but no one's going to see it and it'll do the job. So now I'm going to place that inside of my bigger container, and it's got plenty of space on the sides, so there's plenty of drainage room. Then I'm going to take my fill container and place that inside that container. And I'm going to take my next container and set that, my reserve container, and set that side by side with this one here. Alright, so they'll sit like this. Now, let me show you what you would do if you had plastic instead of another container. Basically, you're doing the same thing. You're just wanting to create sort of a barrier for the water to fill up to a certain amount and then to run off the edges. So, let's see. I'm going to place this inside and just cut the amount off that I need, just so I can get an idea of how high I want it to go before it starts to drain. And again, this process doesn't have to be particularly pretty. You can just kind of eyeball it. Alright, then I'm going to open this up. And of course, remember that you have your dirt or your gravel at the bottom. Place this inside. And trim off any edges so that it makes more of a circular pattern, a circular area here. So as we're setting our two containers inside of the bigger container or the plastic, if you're afraid that roots, depending on the type of plant you're planting, are going to get into these holes and plug them up, or the soil you're using is going to plug it, you can just use a little bit of garden cloth to wrap around it. Again, it doesn't have to be particularly pretty. Just needs to kind of shield the area a little bit, and then wrap it around and just place that inside the container. And now you're going to fill all of that in with your topsoil. Okay, so I've really packed my topsoil into this container, and I've also put it around the outside edges of my bucket, which I'm using right now, or if you were using the plastic, which I used for another planter of mine, then you would do it around the outside of the plastic as well. Again, that's just so you have a little area for the runoff to go before draining out. It's ensuring that you have drainage area. So now that that's firmly packed, now I can add my garden soil. So what do you think? Easy enough, right? And amazingly, it'll keep your garden well watered all summer long. All right, if you want more tips or more tricks on how to make this process easier, feel free to visit my blog at homeMadeByCarmona at blogspot.com. I'll see you then.